Okay, and now I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Okay. Does someone see my PowerPoint presentation appear now? Can you guys see the slideshow that I'm sharing that says the workshop title, Exploring Google Street View, Learn Landscape Drawing with Virtual Mediation and Metadata?
Yeah, we can see it.
Great, okay. All right, let's hop in. So what we're gonna go through in this workshop is why someone might wanna do a project like this, where you're combining Google Street View image captures with the process of landscape drawing. I'll also talk about some of the functions of Google Maps Street View, just in case you haven't used it too much in the past, or if you've used it a lot, but there might be some things that you didn't notice about it before. I'll talk about the supplies that you will need if you want to do your own drawing inspired by Street View, some different project variations for this type of work, and then I'm going to do a brief demonstration. I'm not going to do like a complete project, but I'll just show you guys some of the intro steps, and then I have some images in the slideshow of some completed projects like this, and then we'll have a discussion at the end. Okay, so why would someone want to use Google Street View to do a landscape drawing? So traditionally, landscape drawings started with people imagining scenes. I'm talking like hundreds of years ago, where artists would be working in studios, thinking about places that they had seen, and then also using an imaginative component to fill in the gaps. And then it was kind of the late 1800s, where especially in France, people started painting in plein air a little bit more, where they would take their painting or drawing tools outdoors and actually make artwork out of doors. And I'm talking about like professional level artists. There's not a lot of history about how just everyday people who felt like drawing, what is the history of that? What types of places and materials they were using? If stuff hasn't been saved by museums, we don't know as much about what inspiration people might have used for landscape drawing in the past. But now in the contemporary day and age, there's a lot of access online through Google Street View and some other different applications and collections of images of landscapes for places that you might not have ever been able to visit, or maybe places that you have seen in the past, but can't go there anymore, especially in a time like this during the pandemic, when so many things have shut down. There's a lot of travel restriction, official and self-imposed. And so for me, I started conceiving of this project last summer because there were different places that I wanted to go, but couldn't. And as kind of like a memorial and just like experience with that place, decided to start doing some drawings by looking at the place through Google Street View. And then once I started doing that, I thought it was kind of fun to see the way that Google Street View's image captures manipulate the reality of space, because there are a bunch of different images of a certain place that are woven together to create one quote unquote seamless panoramic visual experience. But sometimes you can kind of tell like where that meshing of the different images that were captured didn't line up so perfectly, or are distorting the proportions of something. So incorporating that into the drawing is kind of a unique experience that shows that your source material was this filtered experience of reality, and then you're doing this other layer of manipulation to the space. So these are the types of things that I was thinking about when I started doing Google Maps Street View drawings. And this is something that anybody could do because Google Maps Street View is a free tool and it's very proliferate. There are image captures from all of the continents of the world that are on Google Street View. So you could really explore different places a lot through it. And it started in 2007 with just a few US cities, but it's really taken off and covered a lot of ground since then. So yeah, those are some different features of Google Maps that might be interesting to use for drawing. And while you're doing this type of process, you can kind of choose what you see in the image captures and what you don't see, and play with that a little bit more with the way that you're doing your own rendition of a space and blocking new things or selectively highlighting others that seem meaningful to you. And if you guys want to, I'm gonna like flip back and forth between the slideshow and some web pages throughout the presentation. So I put all of the links to the web pages that I'm going to in the slideshow. And the screen share thing is like blocking me being able to make this full screen. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to send the slide deck out to you guys afterwards if you want to come back to these web pages and read through the stuff a little bit more yourself. But this page talks about like the history of Street View. And if you go down, you can actually see where they're going to be driving around and making new captures. So you can see over on the left is the location, and then over on the right is the months that the projects are going to be occurring in those places. And last time I looked at this, a couple months ago, oh yeah, the California ones, because of all the wildfires, the project deadline got extended. There were some news articles about how the Google Street View capture project timeline got a little shifted. So it looks like all of these that are upcoming or ongoing right now are in the United States, but sometimes there's other countries on this list as well. Okay, let's go back in here. Oops. Okay. So, like I said, Google Street View started in 2007, and I mentioned that all these different images that are being meshed together to create the panoramic views that are in Street View are captured. And originally, when it started, it was just through a camera on top of a car. But now they have a bunch of different techniques for getting street views. This blue thing in the top area is actually like a backpack. And so there are some different like hiking trails that now have a Google Street View. I mean, the Street View name is a little misleading, as these different technology tools and different equipment get used to create different street view captures. There's also a snowmobile, and you see the moped, which is handy for cities that have like tiny alleys and things like that, or like pedestrian areas even. And then over on the right, that white tall row body looking one is actually where you can do street view captures inside of buildings now. So there are quite a few museums that have participated globally in the Google Street View program to get captures of their museums. And let's see if any of these, yeah, like the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia is one of them. So if you go to St. Petersburg, Russia, the State Heritage Museum on Google Maps, and you drop the little Street View guy in it, you'll be able to navigate around inside the museum, which we'll get into a little bit more of like exploring on Google Maps together in a few minutes. And they also have user submitted data for Street View now. So the Street View panoramic views that are on a slider where you can kind of move down a road and see along the path of where the capture equipment went is the regular Google Street View, Google captured images, but then there's also individual little pinpointed spots on Google Maps now, where it's just a 360-degree picture of one specific spot that users can contribute. And it doesn't get meshed in with other photos from that scene so that you can move in that space, but you could kind of spin around in the tool. And those are really popular at touristy locations, such as like Times Square. Like if you try to get on like the streets surrounding Times Square in New York City using Google Street View, you're probably gonna accidentally drop the little cursor onto a user submitted capture that's just in one specific place, because there's so many dots on the map there of user submitted photos. It's kind of hard to get onto the actual Google like road ones. Which I might show that you guys that too. Okay, so just a couple of things that I want to outline before we actually get on Google Maps is that there's different ways to use Street View, and you can start by entering an address, and then after it pulls up the address, there'll be a little box where you can click into it and get Street View, or you can start at the map and just kind of browse an area and use the little yellow figure guy who appears in like the bottom right corner of the Google Maps interface, and you can drag him over the map or them. It's a genderless little yellow person. And wherever there's blue lines on the map, that indicates where Street View captures have been taken. So certain rural areas that are not heavy traffic roads might not have captures. If you're wondering if a place has captures for Street View, going on the map, picking up the little yellow person and hovering them over the map is the best way to see where the blue lines, the captures exist. There's also the time machine, which this is a little screenshot under the yellow person where it's got like a little glowing clock and a little caret next to it, which is a drop-down menu, which I'll show you. And it says Street View. And that's where you can see if there's Street View captures from different years. So a lot of places that were originally captured in 2007 when the project started have been recaptured multiple times as the camera equipment has improved, as the algorithms to mesh the photos together have improved, so that the current Street View is a little bit more finished and refined looking for a lot of the places, but they still give you access to those older captures. And if you use that little drop-down menu for the time machine, then you can experience and still view the older captures. So let's see. One more thing to talk about before we actually get onto the maps is the type of metadata that is involved in Google Maps. So some of the metadata is just visible in the interface when you're using it, such as navigation links. So when you're on a Google Street View, it shows you little white arrow like carets if there's a pathway for the capture that you can travel on. So the navigation links are just indicating where the captures continue, and that's type of metadata because it's overlaid on the image captures after they're created, and those navigation links adjust based on your position. Another type of metadata is the street names. So this stuff is going to make more sense once I get the map up. So I'm just going to get the map up and then talk about it. And I'm not going to show you guys this link right now, but if anyone is interested in web development and using APIs for Google Maps, then you might want to check out this Maps shortcut tutorial afterwards. Okay, let me go into, oh, I've done this myself again, where I'm blocking things because of the screen share box at the top of my screen. Okay, I'm going to show you guys a place on the Rutgers College Ave campus that I think has a kind of fun Street View experience. So this building, 542 George Street on the College Avenue campus, it actually is not the Center on Violence Against Women and Children anymore. That unit of the social work department of Rutgers vacated the building in 2019. And as far as I know, there isn't a new department or unit officially in there right now. And I don't know if it's actually vacant or if the school social work just uses it as general office space. But I typed in an address, and what I was talking about before about the two ways to get into Street View, if you see under this like profile for the address photos, and there's a picture box that has this little like spin around white arrow on it, then that means that there's like panoramic view, and that if you click on this, it's going to get you to Street View. Or if you want to see all the street views in this area, you're going to grab the little yellow guy, and then you can see all those blue lines are where captures have been. And right over here, you see those 4 blue dots? those, I believe, are user submitted ones. Those are just like the individual spot 360-degree photos. So let's actually start with one of those. Okay, yep. So I think we're seeing a baseball cap in the foreground here. So maybe someone who was taking this capture was holding their phone or device they were using above their head. And right there, you can see that's the Rutgers Honors College housing facility. And this is a little bit on the other side of the block from the 542 George Street address that I wanted to show you guys, which is on the other side of this building. So I'm going to use this back arrow and get out of this and go back to the map and drop our little guy right here. This is the intersection of George Street and Seminary Place. And at that corner is where this address is. Okay, so sometimes you never know which direction you're going to be pointed at when it plops you down. Actually, maybe it's facing north right now. I think the Johnson & Johnson headquarters wall that we're looking at with the Raritan River on the other side is facing north from here. Okay, so this is the address that I wanted to show you guys. If you have a touchscreen, you can use 2 fingers on this interface to get closer from the same base point, but like zooming in, or I think you can use the wheel on your mouse to zoom in. So this is the house that I wanted to show you guys. And what's interesting about it, I think, is kind of the dichotomy of ages of buildings, because this house was built in the 1860s. And then someone who ended up being the president of Rutgers lived in it, was like the second resident of it, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places now. So this is a rather old building. It's got a lot of historical importance to New Brunswick and Rutgers, and I'm gonna get away from it a little bit so that we can have this angle of it where the Honors College is in the background. And okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the metadata first. So you can see down here on the actual road that it says George Street, and there's our little arrow for like the navigation showing that you could slide down George Street for further captures. So those pieces of metadata are added to the map. Also, you can see up here in the top left corner, the address of your perspective. So as you slide down the road, that address is going to change a little bit. So that's a metadata component telling you about your location that's adjusting as you are. And then down here in the bottom left corner, it gives you like a contextual map layout of the spot that you dropped yourself into. If you go exploring down multiple roads on Street View, this could be handy to kind of get a sense of the direction that you're moving in if the roads aren't like a perfect grid system. And then let's use the time machine function. I'm backing up here again because I like this perspective of what I'm about to show you. So the Rutgers Honors College housing is a much newer build. And if we look here, I use the drop-down menu, and you can see on this little like timeline that the earliest capture was in 2007. So New Brunswick was one of like the early cities to get some Google Street Views. And then there's these different dots. These are all the different times that this location has been captured in Street View. And if you click on one, it's going to give you a little preview. And then if you click on that image, then it'll change the whole capture experience to what it was at that point in time. And if we go back a little further, so that's August 2018. Well, some of these dots are a little close together and it's hard to get the pointer right on it. Okay, November 2017. I'm looking for the time before the Honors College was there. So November 2017, it was still there, or it was already there. July, August of 2015. Okay, this is it. October of 2013 is when it was under construction. They were doing the zone building and the clearing of the land. So one of the things that I really like about Google Street View is this time machine function, because you can see how different landscapes have transformed over time. And I mean, as long as Google keeps supporting the storage of all of these historical street capture data, for the foreseeable future, it would be pretty awesome if, by time our generation is, all senior citizens, or, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, however long, if you can still see these 2007, 2013, 2019 Street View captures, then you could explore a space that might have changed its landscape a lot, especially urban environments where buildings might have been knocked down or constructed. So for just interest value, that is kind of cool. But also for things like historic preservation, when people are applying for grants for historic preservation, like tax write-offs and stuff from like their different states and sometimes even federal agencies, sometimes they have to prove that a building was a certain way and that they're trying to restore it to that old way in order to like get funds for like preservation or like tax write-offs. So if you could look at a Google Street Capture from 70 years ago and say, this is the type of roofing material that was used, and this is what the porch looked like, and these were the types of windows, and we want to restore it, if you could just have all of that data at your fingertips through Google Street View, that is a pretty cool use, I think. So I'll zoom in here again so that you guys can just see kind of what's happening in the background for Street View. And one of the privacy concerns with Street View is that it's capturing a lot of public places, and people don't always want to be captured in public places, and legally they shouldn't be. So faces and license plates and personal identifying information like that is generally going to be fuzzed out in Google Street View, but it's not perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom out now. Oh, and you'll also see one more metadata component is down here in the bottom right. There is a little black bar that tells you when the image capture was taken, that the copyright information is for Google, that it was taken in the United States, and there's hyperlinks where you can report problems and see the terms of use. So the terms of use really relate to like the APIs for Google Street View and Google Maps if you want to be repurposing this information and these tools and adding your own layers of metadata, whether that be, tagging positions on a map that are related to a scavenger hunt, or wildlife conservation, like hot spots, or whatever type of thing that you could think of to repurpose these maps for. There are different fair use like terms for that, and the metadata about the copyright information is baked into a lot of the platform. So this like Google word down here at the bottom and the copyright stuff down in the bottom right corner is for the most part persistent if you're reusing the material, unless you have a special like paid agreement with
Oh, Whitney, I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned about the faces, identifiable faces being blurred. So if inadvertently Google had captured a face, and if the person captured requests Google to fuzz it or something, do you think they oblige to that?
I'm starting to second guess the fact that I even said that, because in my mind that's just what should be happening.
Right.
But now I'm thinking back to different places that I've looked at Street View, and the last time I did this presentation, we looked at a location where my partner was on a phone call outside of his workplace, and he told me like when he got home from work that day, oh, I saw the Google streetcar like come by when I was standing outside, like I think I'm going to be in the capture. And so we can go look at that one, and that's like going to be a very isolated example of whether or not his face is fuzzed out, because now I'm doubting whether they actually do fuzz faces, or if faces are okay and just license plates and things aren't.
Because I can see that, if even if your partner saw the car, right? Saw the
Yeah.
car, but most of the time I think you wouldn't notice. If you don't notice and you're captured,
Right.
the
Yeah, I
different.
think that that's what the report a problem feature is for. I
Right.
think that I should try to find a face that isn't fuzzed and report it and see what happens. That would be a good experience to know for sure kind of what the timeline is like for like correcting errors like that. I'm not positive.
Yeah,
But
this picture, I don't think I would be, if I'm in front of him somewhere, I don't think I would be able to say, oh, you're the guy on the Google Maps, right?
right, yeah.
Fuzzy enough.
But sometimes like the especially when they're doing street captures in like dense urban places, there are a lot of people around.
Right.
So I believe that it's a face recognition algorithm that does the scrubbing, and then it's basically reliant on, okay, yeah, here are the request blurring images: a face, my home, my car, license plate, a different object.
So there is a mechanism for that.
Yep. Okay. So now you guys all know how to report the problem if, like me, you hadn't looked at this option before. So the way that I got to that was just down here in the bottom right corner of the map. There was a report a problem little hyperlink. So that's good to know. Let's see. Let's go back into the PowerPoint. Oh, of course, it zoomed me back to the beginning. I'm stressing out on my laptop having multiple tabs open in Zoom, so bear with me. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about this house, the Doolittle Demarest house is what it's called, because Doolittle, I believe, was the first resident, and then Demarest was the name of the president of Rutgers who lived in it for a number of years. And in this case, this historic place that's on the National Register of Historic Places does have documentation of what it looked like from almost a century ago through the Library of Congress, because it's this officially recognized important place. And so this is like, you know, a very small percentage of buildings and landscapes have historic image captures that you can use to compare what the places look like now. But the Library of Congress did sponsor or is the retainer now for images that were captured through the Historic American Buildings Survey, which happened in the 1930s. And this historic building got 6 images of it put into this collection, which Library of Congress now hosts. And I didn't even know that these images of it existed until I looked at the Wikipedia page, and it was the Wikipedia page that in its had these exact photos from the Library of Congress, and then in their reference said like this is from the Library of Congress and gave links to that collection page. So I think it's just kind of nifty to compare and contrast some of those old and new, especially I think it's in this one. You can see in the background a building that is not there anymore. So this building past the chain link fence appears to be like a 3.5 story flat top with these slightly rounded grid style windows. To me, it kind of looks like either like a school building or like a manufacturing building. At this point in time, I don't know if it was part of the Rutgers campus or not, so I would have to do a little bit more exploring of that. But this perspective is occurring from around like the Honors College side of the Doolittle Demarest house. And oh dear, let me get out of one of these. And it's just like a parking lot for the social work school where that background building is now, which I can show you guys. Let's see. Let me go back. Oh, this is a slow load, so I'm eating up time on trying to show you. So what we're seeing in the background looks to be like right here. The picture was taken from Seminary Place over here. And it does not look like to me the building that's currently closest on that side. This one, I think that the roof shape here is pitched, and those windows, there's round top ones on the bottom and then rectangular ones on top. So if the camera was over here taking the picture of the house, the background building that we saw in that Library of Congress image, I think does not exist anymore, because I think that it would be right
I
here.
think it's something that was, see, immediately behind the little house, there are some windows.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is
That's the School of Education. And I wonder if that picture, the historical photo, is capturing a building that used to be there.
right, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe the other one was torn down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I've done it by getting like kind of mixed up on the map. Oh, okay. I didn't realize that there were street captures inside lecture halls of this building. So, oh, okay. It was a user submitted one, I think, based on the, so for like the ones in museums that are captured with that trolley that Google owns some of the trolleys and will send them out. If you look down at kind of like the foot area, you can see the trolleys like equipment. So the fact that this is blurred, I'm thinking it is blurred because it's part of someone's body. That's my guess. But let me get back out of here. Let's zoom in. Yeah, so I believe that this is a dormitory now on campus. And you're right, Kyle, most likely that other building was taken down. Well, so this is the angle of the Library of Congress photo.
Oh.
You can see that there's these two windows here versus on the other side of the house, there's a porch in between the two. It's kind of difficult, but trust me, based on the chimneys and stuff, I was looking at this earlier, and this is, it tells you that it's looking at it from the, which direction is it? I think it says like this was taken from the south. Oh, it's in the title. Yes. So this is rear, west, and north elevations. So rear west would be
would be the
over here.
Would be
the front of the
opposite
house.
to the river. Opposite.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So a little bit of a mystery in that old Library of Congress photo about the other buildings, but it's interesting to compare how the landscape has changed. Some of the pine trees have stayed, but there were some other trees that have disappeared since, and also the ivy on the building is no longer there. So that's a good way to use Street View to compare old and new perspectives of places. And then let's talk a little bit more about the drawing component. So if you're going to use Google Street View to create your own landscape drawing, you've got a number of different options for what you're going to include and what you're going to leave out in terms of the metadata and the extra items that are in the view. Let's see. Oh. Just real quick before I actually get into the drawing, I'm just going to point these things out, and then if you guys want to come back and look more into them after the presentation when you have the slide deck, you're welcome to. So art inspired by Google Street View, like a living picture type of situation, a tableau vivant. Some people play with the idea that they recognize that Google Street View captures happen with certain types of equipment. And in the case on the right, a garage owner fakes Google murder in Edinburgh Street. This guy, he saw the Google streetcar coming down the road and he thought, oh, it's gonna take like 3 minutes for it to pass like my business. So he asked his employee to pretend murder him at a street corner, like a block ahead, so that they could, basically play a joke on people using the Street View capture. And it did make it into the published Street View, and it did get reported as like, what is this violent scene? Like, and then some reporters tracked down the guy who staged it and asked him why he wanted to do it, and he just thought it would be amusing. So that's just kind of a fun little story. And then some other fun ways that people are using Google Street View, like I was talking about at the beginning about where people draw inspiration for doing landscape paintings. The artist Bill Guffey is just one of many artists who uses Street View for his direct painting inspiration. You can see in that picture, he's got a computer behind him on the left-hand side that's got a picture of a boat on the river, and that's a Street View view. And then on the right is his canvas and his painting that he's using inspired on it. And on the right, there's this photographer named Jackie Kenny, and she just basically finds Street View captures that she thinks are really visually appealing and just prints them out, frames them, maybe filters them a little bit, cuts out that extra content like the Google little map in the corner and the copyright information. And she's been allowed to do this on the basis of not selling the works. So she has been exhibiting these, but in order to do like sales, there would have to be like contract, like negotiations with Google, which they very rarely give out for selling content that was published on Street View. So yeah, for like the permissions for these different artists using Street View in these different ways, and if you wanted to use it for an academic or a business purpose, you can look at the description of Section 107 of the Copyright Act, which talks about fair use. So fair use is up to a court's interpretation. So basically, you can use Google Street View for whatever you want, but if Google thinks that you've taken it too far and that you're profiting off of it in an unfair way, then they might sue you, and then it's up to a court to decide if it was fair use. So fair use depends on things like the purpose and character of the use. So if it's for a commercial nature, that's where it gets a little bit more risky and dicey and perhaps not allowed legally, and the nature of the copyrighted work. So if somebody was using like the Street View captures, say, of their own home or land that they owned, even if it didn't have a building on it or something, then that might be considered a little bit more fair use than property or places that they didn't have a relationship with or something like that. The amount and sustainability of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. So for Google Street View, there are so many captures across the globe. There's so many square feet in a way of captures that if you're using just like one screenshot of one place, even if it is for a commercial purpose, then that might be considered fair use because the ratio of content that you're using versus what's out there with this product and tool is very small, and the effect of the use upon the potential market or value of the copyrighted work. So if someone tried to just use all the Google Street View captures and create their own Street View website platform that they charge membership fees for, then that would be basically theft of the market value of the copyrighted work. And you can check out those links for Google's guidelines for non-commercial use are at the top. The Copyright Act is in the middle, and then an introduction to Google Maps API if you're interested in using the Maps application programming interface, then you can explore that. Okay, so for actual drawing of landscapes now, some supplies that you'll need are paper, a pencil, most likely, I think it's good to use a black marker, and then some coloring utensils. So you can also use a ruler if you want to, depending on how precise you would want a drawing to be. But those are your basic supplies. And if you were gonna do, oh, I just realized that I'm not in present mode. I'm sorry about that, you guys. Guess it doesn't make too much difference, but I'll just go back into it. If you're going to make a drawing based on a Street View capture, you might have a hard time deciding which view of the building you like the most. So why choose? You could just do a mashup of multiple views. And if you're going to do that, there's a couple of different strategies that I would recommend. If you are more of like the precise type of like mindset and you want your drawing to be an exact replica of what you're seeing on the screen, then something like a grid where you use 4 different captures from 4 different angles of a place, or maybe 4 different places that have some sort of relationship with each other, a grid might be good. If you want to do more of a mashup that's more of a fluid and abstract composition, then you could really use as many captures as you want and fit them together like a puzzle. This center design is kind of what I'm going to show you guys an example of next, where you're collaging different angles. And also, you would want to think about which components of the capture are most important for you to make visible. So my experience with this has been focusing on a particular building for the drawing. You could do a landscape of a more like natural setting that doesn't have any man-made influences in it. But I think the buildings are kind of interesting and cool because of the way that the angles get distorted a little bit, and the other things that are in the frame, such as the street signs and trees and vehicles. Maybe there's a mail truck, or maybe there's a car that your family doesn't own anymore, but when the Street View capture was taken, a vehicle that has some sort of meaning or history to you was in a capture. So those are the types of things that you could decide to incorporate. And also that meta information that we talked about that's on the Street View screen when you're viewing it, like the little copyright information in the map that shows the area surrounding where the street view is occurring, and like the address component. Maybe you want to draw in those little features on there so that whoever's doing it knows that this was inspired by Street View and that it's this mediated experience. You got the landscape from a digital copy and you're turning it back into like a handmade copy. So those are some things to think about if you want to experiment with this type of project. And then here's an example. So there's Douglas Library on the Douglas campus of Rutgers. And I started with this screenshot on the left. And for this one, I decided to incorporate all the metadata that was available on it, right down to the little X to like exit out of Street View that was on the corner. I like the way that this Chapel Drive meta label is kind of slanted and going off to the side. This little map that shows that you're close to George Street and the Route 18 highway that is this little yellow stripe in the corner. I thought those were little interesting pieces to include. And so when you get going with actually doing the drawing, this picture on the right is, I'm trying to show you that you should try and do the longest or largest lines and shapes first. So look at your view, I would take a screenshot when you're gonna do this project, because if you're in Street View and then you accidentally like tap the screen or the mouse, it might shoot you along the capture path and you might not be able to get back in the same exact spot again. So unless you have a really good memory, it might be hard to use what you're looking at on Street View for direct inspiration, unless you take a screenshot and then put it in, open the image or put it in like a Word doc or something. So then you'll look for long lines. So the first things that stood out to me for the long lines were the roof of the building, that we've got this like strong contrast between the roofing material and the sky. And another really long line is this curb, like sidewalk to road line right here. And then also some of the shapes of the trees are kind of big in comparison to things like this bike rack and this little traffic cone and these little street lights. Those are much smaller shapes and lines in the frame. And if you start trying to draw everything that's over on this corner or this side of the frame before you kind of get your overall composition, you might end up not being able to fit everything that you want on your piece of paper, because sometimes when you're drawing things, what you're seeing in your mind and the way your hand's working, the scale might get thrown off. even if your screenshot is 13 inches big on your laptop screen and you've got a 13-inch piece of paper, trying to make that exact like translation of scale might be a little difficult unless you actually held a piece of paper up to the screen and using the light coming through the screen did a little tracing. I didn't do that with any of mine, but if you're new to drawing, if you want to do something like that, that can be a good option to just get you started, especially with high contrast areas and long lines. If you're not worried about damaging your screen with the writing utensil through the paper, then take a piece of copy paper, put it up on the screen, increase the brightness on your screen as much as possible, and do a rough outline of those big shapes. And then go back in and fill in the details. So this transformed into, first, I would say do pencil lines for everything. And a tip when you're drawing is that if you don't like a shape or a line that you just made, don't erase it until after you draw the new one. Because if it needs to be a little bit wider to the left, or it needs to be a little bit smaller, if you erase and then try to draw again, you might end up making the exact same shape. It's just like a muscle memory thing, the way that your vision translates to your hand for drawing. It can be repetitive. So if you draw, like, let's say for this like tree branch, if I wanted it to be smaller, I would draw in the new shape and then go back and erase. And if you're sketching lightly with pencil first, then you'll be able to make those edits. And then I would say go back in with like a black marker and go over your lines to make your composition really pop, which is what I did here. And then for this one, I chose to use some colored pencils, but this type of project, you could use watercolors, you could use markers, you could use paint. I think colored pencil is the maybe quickest and fastest and cheapest way to create a landscape drawing that has some color in it. So yeah, that's one example for you. And that was just an individual scene, one screenshot of one place. If you want to do a mashup where you're using different angles or multiple places in one composition, then do a little bit of planning ahead of time. So this screenshot is a little fuzzy, but what I did here was go into Google Sheets. And in Google Sheets, you can change the transparency of images. So I took 3 screenshots of this property, which to me has sentimental value because it's a house that one of my childhood friends grew up in, and her parents ended up getting divorced and they moved away and things. And so I have this, very isolated period of my life where I spent a lot of time here and then couldn't anymore. And so I just wanted to do kind of like an homage drawing for it. And it was also the house where my great-grandmother was born. I'm from a very small town, so a lot of my family still lives in the area where my ancestors lived. So that's like kind of a fun component of this property for me. So I did 2 different angles of the building and then an aerial one here. And the reason I decided to do a mashup for this property is because there are a lot of trees around it and there's no one good angle that really gives you a sense of what the whole building looks like. It's kind of like an awkward shape. There's some additions on the backside. So I decided to do 2 angles and then also an aerial shot that has like the intersection that it's at. And if you do format options is what that fuzzy word is right there on an image in a Google slide, then you can increase the transparency so that you can kind of overlay multiple images and maybe rotate them, get a sense of how you want them to interlock and collage before you get into your drawing. So there's kind of a finished product for that one. And a funny component of this is that I drew a little cemetery over here because even though that's not really visible in this screenshot, that's something I brought from my own memory because the corner right here where the house is directly across from a corner where there's a cemetery. And my childhood friend's mother loved to tell us ghost stories and scare us with stories about like the cemetery and things like that. And I just have, fun and spooky memories about that. So I wanted to include that. So you can really bring customization based on your own experience or imagination with a place to landscape drawing. And these are just a list of the steps that I just kind of said. So if you want to reference those, if you're trying to do this project by yourself afterwards, you could do that. And oh, back to the order thing for a moment. So I said with the order that you're going to want to try and start with the biggest shapes and the longest lines. But another thing to think about is that buildings are probably the focal point. And so you might want to focus on those first and then let the other stuff kind of like fill in if you start, or it really depends on what your preference is. If you really want to focus on the greenery and the metadata and the vehicles and the people with their fuzzed out faces that are in the captures, then that's your prerogative and creativity. So yeah, you can go for it in whatever way you want. And if you're new to drawing and you're like nervous about how to get started and you're not sure if you're going to be able to do it or if you're going to like doing it, I would recommend setting a few time limits for yourself that are pretty short to just do some rough drafts so that you just like forced to jump right into it with, you know, like 2 feet first and get started. If you don't draw very often, it's really easy to get hung up on little details and proportions not being just the way that you want. So I would say do like a rough sketch, like set a 2-minute timer and just like do the biggest shapes first and then add a few details and like see how much you can get done in 2 minutes. And then kind of like look at it and be like, oh, like this is the component of that I liked. This is where I need to improve. And then, you know, decide how much time you want to go for like a more official version of it. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now. Let me see, I'm gonna stop the share for a moment so I can